Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, Parler, and Instagram. And of course, be sure to visit www.mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
Where's the goddamn sink? Who are you?
My name is Pearl.
Well, there goes our big payday.
She's just an innocent woman.
We ain't gonna sell her. That ain't what we do.
If you take me to my home, there would be a handsome reward. This way, to the brothel.
Gentlemen, please, make yourselves at home.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 285. Releasing on digital and video on demand on August 21 is The Pale Door, a horror western hybrid that focuses on a gang of outlaws that find themselves battling a coven of witches after a train robbery gone bad. Joining me now is the director and co-writer of The Pale Door, Mr. Aaron B. Koontz. Aaron, I thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, before anything else, I really want to talk about the title of the movie. And the beginning of the film, you quote the Edgar Allan Poe poem, The Haunted Palace. Talk to me about that poem. What does it mean to you? Is that something that you had on your mind for a while and you always wanted to use as a title for a film? Or did that come afterwards when you were looking for something to some influence as to what you will title your film?
Well, it's oddly a kind of a combination of both. So, I mean, I'm just an Edgar Allan Poe fan. I have a book of poems that I've had as a coffee table book for a long time. And The Haunted Palace was one that I'd revisited many times. And the film was untitled for a while. And I remember I went back and I was just I wasn't trying to find a name. I just was reading it because I enjoyed doing so. And then kind of came across and I just kind of love the imagery of this poem about this town that's now become this like cave, this kind of place of evil, and then what it can do to people. And it talks about how evil can overtake you and change you. And this, and then there was such a creepy line of to laugh but smile no more. And this idea of laughing without smiling was just so scary to me. So originally I was like, "Oh, the Haunted Palace. Why don't I just call this the Haunted Palace?" And then I was reading The Pale Door. Just kind of reminded me of The Pale Horse, and it just kind of had this Western kind of feel to it. And it was in that same stanza. And I was like, "Oh, this is perfect. I'm just gonna." And I just told the team, I was like, "Guys, I don't. If everybody disagrees with me, I'm not doing it. This is the title of the movie. Like, I found it. We're going with it. It's perfect." I was so excited to make it happen, and I think it's just it's wonderfully apropos to be able to put a Poe quote at the beginning of this movie for all those reasons. So yeah, I was delighted to make it happen.
And it's a great title as well. It brings about a real sense of mystery. I'm sure that's something that you wanted as well for your movie. Absolutely.
This is something where, there's even a line where he says, we walked through the Pale Door and hell was our reward, that we added later after I had found the title. And because I think there's just something about these journeys that you're going on, and I talked with the actors many times about how, look, you're just looking at the colors of the threads, and you have no idea what the pattern of the quilt is, and there's this overarching kind of thing going on here, and these witches and these powers are kind of pulling strings in a way that you're trying to kind of figure out your place within it. And that mystery just adds to the elemental nature of it, the dread, the suspense, and what's there. So yeah, I'm glad that seems to work with folks.
It's such an interesting hybrid, the Western and this type of horror movie. Interestingly, I was doing some research on yourself, and I came across this quote you had about an analogy between Outlaws and Witches, this special connection that they have. Can you maybe talk about that a little more for my listeners, please?
Yeah, look, I didn't want this to be a good and evil, black and white kind of thing. Like, you know, you have these outlaws that are coming from all these different worlds. And it's like, why did they become outlaws? What caused them to go down this path and to be, you know, live on the outskirts and to do some of the bad things that they do? And what caused, like, what created witches? You know, it's like, well, if we're living in a world where witches really exist, what created them? And I started to find, I thought that there was a common thread of violence leading to more violence, hate begets hate, you know, and that just was a theme that was, you know, going on in our society and stuff that I was dealing with all the time. And obviously, even now, it's reached such a pinnacle in what's going on. And I thought that there were sensibilities there that were interesting to me to explore, where maybe, you know, these cowboys, you know, who come from all these different places, and like what caused them to turn, and what kind of violence in their life, or what kind of neglect in their life, or what kind of strife in their life led them to this world. And then maybe, you know, and then I reappropriated the Salem witch trials. I was like, well, these clearly weren't real witches. These were religious zealots who did not understand what was going on. What if their hatred and all of the ire that they had and all the frustrations that they had in that, and they didn't know how to deal with it because they were scared. They were scared of these people that were different than them. What if there was a person who was watching that take place, watched a person get, you know, stoned, hanged, burnt at the stake, and then that person actually dabbled in black magic, and then next thing you know, the real witches were created out of that hatred, thinking they were real witches, and it becomes this, you know, confirmation bias in a way, this manifest destiny, if you will, of kind of creating this world. And I was like, wow, it just got me really interested in something that was so much more than just cowboys versus witches, you know, in that aspect. And just kind of, I thought that they paralleled each other, and also men and women in many ways. Men underestimating the fortitude and the abilities of the women around them and thinking that they have all the answers that's there. I thought there was something there also to explore.
In the center of the film is this relationship between these two brothers, the Dalton brothers. One played by Zachary Knighton, he plays Duncan, and the other one is played by Devin Druid, is played by Jake. You know, at the end of the film, I was genuinely moved by their story. I really was. And I don't want to go into why, because, you know, spoilers, etc. But when it came to that part of the story, did you also get any feedback in regards to just how moving that conclusion to that story was? Yeah. I mean, look, this is a deeply personal story in many ways. You know, I think there's people who have to. The heroes that we have as younger children, you grow up and you kind of learn they may not be what you thought. I mean, that was me with my father. And I had to tell my brother the truth of our father at one point, which was very similar to the speech that Lester had with Jake in our own kind of roundabout way. And then my brother has struggled with a lot of things that I've had to take care of him. He's an addict. And so there was things that I didn't even realize I was writing that story in that way. And then my co-writer, Cameron Burns, was like, so, Aaron, this is just about your brother and your dad, huh? And I was like, oh, my God, it's just completely coming out of me, and I didn't realize it completely at that moment. So, but then that became the through line, you know, that just became the heartbeat of the film. And even though we do all these crazy things, and it is cowboys and witches, and there's all of this, you know, these fun set pieces and stuff that we do, we still wanted it to have the sentimental, you know, thread that existed, and we wanted it to be this poignant story, hopefully at least that folks find it poignant, you know, about these brothers and about sacrifice and about, you know, making our own decisions and deciding, you know, how we're going to live the life that we want to live, regardless of what has been thrown at us before. So yeah, I'm really glad that resonated with you, because it means everything to me. So it's why I wanted to make the movie more first and foremost. And just to get into a different part of the film, the witches themselves, the look of the witches, kind of like these kind of charred remains and very kind of monstrous look. I mean, there's so many ways you can go when you create a movie like this and that type of creature design. Did you have to go through lots of different type of ideas before you really settled on what you had, or was that something that you really want to do? You want to go with a more kind of like a charred look, a more kind of a monstrous look compared to other movies that dealt with this material?
Yeah, I mean, we did. So Becky Ingram and David Greathouse were my makeup team, and they're wonderful. I worked with them previously on my first feature, Camera Obscura, and I knew that I wanted to do something different. So I loved like Outlaws and Witches, and like when Angelica Houston reveals herself was always so scary to me as a kid. And those elongated features, the nose, the ears, and like that kind of typical look I thought was really great. But then I also loved just the idea of what witches could do, the familiars, the idea that they could this concept of like the Bathory, background of like bathing in blood to keep your youthful look and what that could mean. So I really pulled from, it's an amalgamation of so many different aspects of witch folklore that I really liked, but I wanted a different feel. Like to me, if that feature, like I said in the Outlaws and Witches, like them running after the cowboys just didn't feel as scary. And then once I tied in the aspect of Salem and this idea that some were burnt at the stake, well, and that could have potentially be their original form, the last form before they kind of became these full witches. Well, then that just allowed us to take that form, that Roald Dahl style that was there. Was not just Roald Dahl, but just I keep thinking of that film in particular. Yeah. But that kind of style and look, and then as if they were burnt. And then that became really, really fun to do. And it just allowed us to add a little kind of glisten to them, and also inexpensively. I mean, even though it took 4+ hours of makeup to do them, it allowed me to have the same people play multiple witches, which really helped. So you could like change up their look in the makeup because they were so covered. It was head to toe, 4-hour makeup jobs that you could just change contacts, like certain aspects and features, and then you could get more witches out of limited number of actors. So that was kind of a trick that we did, and it worked out really well.
Working with practical effects, what advantages are there working with practical effects as opposed to, say, computer-generated stuff as a filmmaker, to be able to see, to be able to feel, to be able to touch what is happening in front of you as opposed to what it might look like later in post-production? Yeah,
I mean, look, I think the energy on the set is one of my favorite parts about it, because you're making an indie film, you're working long hours, people are usually, wearing multiple hats, you're asking a lot of your crew, and when you get to pull off, and when it's a CGI effect, it just kind of looks goofy, and you don't know how it's going to be, and people don't really get excited about what's going on. There's something beautiful when you pull off a gag, and this crazy thing happens, and everybody sees it, and it gets everybody pumped up, and they're like, whoa, what is this movie going to be like? And it gets the crew, who maybe haven't even read the script, some crew, that happens many times, they're like, whoa, this is exciting. And it just kind of reinvigorates people to kind of keep pushing through and make that happen, and creates this kind of camaraderie. So there's just a wonderful set feeling of pulling off a gag and seeing these things in person. It also from the actor standpoint too, I think it allows, performances to stand out. It allows to get a more visceral reaction than when you're acting against a tennis ball or a person in a blue suit. It's just a very different thing. So I'm a big believer in practical effects. The Thing is one of my favorite films of all time. And I go back and I think about those kind of feelings and looks and atmospheres and textures. And so that's something I always want to do in all my films.
Finally, I wanted to ask, working on a Western, such a rare opportunity these days. Westerns don't come around that often. When you flesh out your ideas, you have your script, and you're going to be working on a Western or a variation of a Western movie, what was the one thing that you really wanted to do that's aligned with Western genre filmmaking that you did get to do, and what was that feeling like?
Rob a train. Rob a train. Originally it was a stagecoach, and then we scouted everything out for the stagecoach robbery, and then our horse wrangler came in and said, sorry, the horses can't run on this terrain at all. So we had to rethink it, and this is literally a week before shooting. Roman Dent, one of my producers, Sean Talia, co-producer, and my DP, we went to lunch, and a person got up who was sitting, and we were trying to just get game plan, like, what can we do now? How can we figure out this big robbery scene? And I really wanted a big Western set piece. Yeah. And then somebody stood up, and on the back of their shirt it said Oklahoma Train Museum. And we're like, whoa, what is that? And we looked it up, and they had a steam engine train from the 1890s. It was actually, I think, like 1903 or so. So really close of era. And it didn't work. We had to get like a pusher and add some like digital smokestacks, and we had to kind of, make some things kind of work around it. But the fact that we got to actually rob, an of-era steam engine train with a gang of cowboys. I mean, I used to wear a bandana as a kid and pretend like I was robbing a train as a child. So it's, for that to happen was a really, really cool and surreal experience. It's just again, it's one of those set pieces where it's so massive and so amazing to be there in person, and just kind of, you just feel the energy of that. And it just, again, one of those kind of reinvigorating the crew moments, and the train sequence absolutely did that.
So for everyone listening, August 21 in theaters, on demand, and digital, The Pale Door, horror western hybrid. Really recommend you watch it. Great cast, great film, and Aaron B. Koontz, I thank you very much for your time today, and congrats with the film.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and thoughtful questions, and I look forward to talking again in the future.